At 71 years old, Edward Brennan stood in the county clerk's office and watched his son sign the deed to the family construction company while the lawyer who'd served Edward for 30 years wouldn't meet his eyes. 6 weeks after Helen's funeral, Marcus had produced a revised will, a stack of notarized documents, and a doctor's letter stating his mother had been of sound mind when she left everything, the business, the house, the accounts, to her only child, with the recommendation that Edward step aside for his own well-being. All Edward got was a sympathy smile from Marcus and the option to buy, for $30, a condemned firehouse on the east edge of town that the county had been trying to unload for a decade. The building was rusted, boarded up, and sinking into its own foundation, and when Edward asked why this was even part of the estate, Marcus said, "Mom bought it at auction years ago for back taxes. Probably forgot she even owned it." But Edward remembered the firehouse, and he remembered that Helen's father had been fire chief there for 27 years before he died, and Helen never forgot anything. The meeting lasted 11 minutes. Marcus didn't raise his voice once. He wore a charcoal suit and used words like transition, clarity, and dad's comfort. The lawyer, Gene Pittman, slid the papers across the table with the care of a man trying not to spill poison. Edward's hands shook as he signed away his wife's company, the business he'd helped build for 43 years, and accepted the deed to a firehouse everyone else called a teardown. He paid $30 in cash. Marcus smiled and said he'd cover the first year of property taxes as a gift. "So you have a project, Dad. Something to keep you busy." Edward left with a folder, a key, and no fight left in him. He'd been tired since Helen died. The kind of tired that sleep didn't fix. His arthritis was worse. His blood pressure medication cost $200 a month even with insurance, and the insurance was gone now because it had been through the company. Marcus said he'd help him figure out Medicare options, but the phone calls never came. Edward had his pension, small and fixed, and a checking account Helen had kept separate. It would last maybe a year if he was careful. The house he'd lived in for 34 years was gone. Marcus needed it sold to release equity for the business. Edward moved into a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on Dover Street. The walls were thin and smelled like detergent and mildew. He could hear everything. At night he lay awake and thought about the way Helen had looked in the hospital those last 2 weeks, pale, confused, her voice thin as paper. Marcus had been there every day. Edward had thought it was devotion. Now he wasn't sure. He didn't visit the firehouse right away. He didn't have the heart. But in early November, when the first snow started to fall and the laundromat heat barely reached his apartment, Edward drove out to the east edge of town in his 15-year-old pickup and looked at what he'd inherited. The firehouse was worse than he remembered. It was a single-story brick structure with a rusted metal roof that sagged in the middle and a bay door that had been welded shut. The windows were boarded over. The concrete apron out front was cracked and overgrown with weeds. Someone had dumped trash along the side, rotted plywood, an old stove, a stack of tires. The building sat alone on a 2-acre lot that backed up to a line of bare trees and a culvert that ran with cold black water. Beyond that, nothing but empty land stretching toward the ridge. Edward stood in the snow and felt the weight of every year. But he'd paid $30 and he had nowhere else to go. He jimmied the side door open with a pry bar. Inside, the air was cold and stale, thick with the smell of rust and rot. The main bay was a cavern of shadows. The old engine was long gone, but the tire tracks were still visible in the oil-stained concrete. Hooks hung empty on the walls. A bulletin board dangled by one corner, covered in curled, yellowed papers. Pigeons had nested in the rafters. Their droppings covered everything. Edward walked slowly through the wreckage. He remembered this place. He'd volunteered here in his 20s, back when Helen's father, Chief Raymond Collar, ran the department with a clipboard and an iron grip. Helen used to bring coffee on cold nights. She'd sit on the back bumper of the engine and talk about nursing school. Her father had loved her fiercely. He died of a heart attack 10 years ago, and Helen had cried for weeks. Why had she bought this place? Edward moved deeper inside. There was a back hallway that led to the old office, a bathroom with a broken toilet and a storage room. And then, at the end of the hall, he saw the locker room. The door was ajar. Inside, a row of tall metal lockers stood against the wall, most of them doorless or dented beyond recognition. But one at the far end was still intact. It was olive green, stenciled with the number 7, and it had a heavy padlock looped through the latch. The lock was new. Brass, barely tarnished. Edward stopped. Everything else in this building was rotted, abandoned, or stolen. But this locker was locked. Recently. He stepped closer. The floor around the locker was cleaner than the rest of the room. No pigeon droppings, no dust buildup. Someone had been here. Edward pulled at the lock. Solid. He looked at the stencil again. Number 7. That had been Chief Collar's locker. Helen's father. His pulse quickened. He tried the key that had come with the deed. It didn't fit the padlock, but when he looked closer he saw a second, smaller keyhole built into the locker door itself, almost hidden under the handle. He slid the key in. It turned. The locker door opened with a groan of old metal. Inside, the space was narrow and dim, but it wasn't empty. Hanging on a hook was a faded fire coat.
With collar stitched across the back. Below it, on the locker floor, was a wooden toolbox, a folded tarp, and a small fireproof safe, the kind with a combination dial. Edward knelt down, his knees complaining. He pulled the safe out. It was heavy, scratched, but intact. There was no combination written anywhere. But then he saw it, a piece of tape on the inside of the locker door, yellowed and peeling, with Helen's handwriting on it. Asterisk, check twice before you trust the ladder. Asterisk, Edward's throat tightened. That had been her father's saying. Chief Collar used to bark it during drills. Helen had repeated it all her life. When the kids climbed trees, when Edward went up on roofs for work, when she double-checked prescriptions at the hospital. Check twice. She'd said it to him the day before she went into the hospital for the last time. He stared at the words. Check twice. The safe had a combination dial. He turned it slowly, trying birth dates, badge numbers. Nothing worked. Then he stopped. Check twice. He thought about the number on the locker. 7. Helen's father's badge number had been 72. The year he joined the department was 1952. Edward tried. July 2nd, 52. The safe opened. Inside were 3 things. A thick manila envelope, sealed with tape, a leather journal with Chief Collar's initials embossed on the cover, and a small cassette recorder with a tape inside labeled, in Helen's handwriting, asterisk for Edward, if something happens, asterisk. His hands were shaking now. He took the recorder out, fumbled with the buttons. The batteries were dead. He stuffed everything into his coat and locked the locker again, his heart hammering. He didn't know what this was yet, but he knew one thing. Helen had left this for him on purpose, and she'd hidden it where only he would think to look. Edward drove back to his apartment, hands tight on the wheel. He stopped at a drugstore and bought AAA batteries. Upstairs, he sat at the small kitchen table under the flickering fluorescent light and loaded the tape. He pressed play. Helen's voice filled the room. Weak but unmistakable. Asterisk, Edward. If you're hearing this, I'm gone and I'm so sorry. I should have told you while I could still fight, but Marcus made sure I couldn't. He's been planning this for over a year. Asterisk, Edward's breath stopped. Asterisk, he came to me after my diagnosis. He said the company was struggling, and that we needed to make changes to protect the family. He had papers. Edward, documents. He told me you were getting forgetful, that you'd made mistakes on job sites, that the accountant was worried. I didn't believe him at first, but he brought Gene Pittman, and Gene backed him up. They told me if I didn't sign things over to Marcus in a medical trust, we'd lose everything in lawsuits. I was scared. I was sick. I signed. Asterisk. Her voice broke. Asterisk. I didn't know he was lying until the last week. I overheard him on the phone. He was laughing about it. Edward, laughing. He said once I was gone, you'd be too broken to fight. He forged some of the documents. Gene helped him, and he made sure I couldn't change anything once I realized. I tried to tell you, but he kept you out of the room. I wasn't strong enough. Asterisk, a long pause, the hiss of the tape. Asterisk, but my father taught me to check twice. I kept records. Everything Marcus did, every lie, every signed paper, every transfer, it's all in the envelope. I hid it in the Firehouse because I knew Marcus would never go there. He hated my dad. The journal has the real financials of the company, the ones Marcus altered. The deed to the Firehouse also includes the timber and mineral rights to the back 40 acres near the ridge. Those rights are worth at least $300,000, maybe more. Marcus doesn't know. I made sure of that. Asterisk. Edward's vision blurred. Asterisk. I'm sorry I couldn't stop him, but you can. Check twice, my love. Always check twice. I love you. Asterisk. The tape ended. Edward sat in the silence, tears running down his face. Then he opened the envelope. Inside were copies of documents. The real will, dated 2 years earlier, leaving everything to Edward with Marcus as secondary. A notarized statement from Helen written a month before she got too sick, stating she was of sound mind and had not authorized any transfer of assets. Photocopies of checks Marcus had written from the company to himself. Large amounts, regular, hidden in contractor payments. An email thread between Marcus and Gene Pittman, discussing keeping the old man out of the loop, and a land assessor's report on the Firehouse property, highlighting the timber and mineral rights, with a note in the margin, asterisk, do not share with EB. Asterisk, Edward read every page twice. His grief turned to something harder. Helen had fought back. Even dying, she'd fought. Now it was his turn. The next morning, Edward went to see the only person he thought he could trust. Frank Bohannon, retired fire captain, 74 years old, living 2 blocks from the old firehouse in a house with a flagpole in the yard. Frank had served under Chief Collar and had been at Helen's funeral. He'd shaken Edward's hand and said, "If you need anything." Edward knocked on his door at 8 in the morning. Frank took one look at him and said, "Come in." Edward told him everything. He played the tape. He showed him the documents. Frank read in silence, his jaw tightening with each page. When he finished, he looked up. "Marcus did this?" "Yes." "Gene Pittman helped him?" "Yes." Frank exhaled slowly. Helen was a good woman. Chief would have burned the town down if he knew. "I need help, Frank. I can't do this alone." Frank stood. "You're not alone. Let me make some calls." Within 2 days, Frank connected Edward to a lawyer in the next county, a woman named Angela Reese who specialized in elder fraud and estate litigation. She reviewed the documents, listened to the tape 3 times, and looked Edward in the eye. "This is ironclad," she said.
Your son committed fraud, coercion, and forgery. Gene Pittman can be disbarred and prosecuted. But if we move on this, Marcus will fight. He'll claim you're confused, that the tape is fake, that you're bitter. It'll get ugly. "I don't care," Edward said. "Good. Then we move fast. I'll file an emergency injunction to freeze the estate assets and petition to void the fraudulent will. But we need to protect you. If Marcus finds out you have this evidence, he'll come after it." "He already knows something's wrong," Edward said. "I haven't spoken to him since I found the tape. He's called 4 times. Angela nodded. "Don't answer. And don't go back to that firehouse alone. If he figures out what Helen hid there, he'll destroy it." But Edward had already thought of that. He'd moved the safe to Frank's basement. The locker at the firehouse was empty now, wiped clean. Still, he felt the creeping dread. Marcus wasn't stupid. 3 days later, the dread proved justified. Edward came back to his apartment after a meeting with Angela and found the door ajar. The frame was splintered near the lock. Inside, his small space had been ransacked. Drawers dumped, mattress flipped, closet torn apart. They'd even pulled the plates out of the cabinets. Nothing was taken. They'd been looking for something specific. Edward's blood went cold. He called Frank. Then he called Angela. She told him to file a police report but not to mention the documents yet. "We're 2 days from filing. If Marcus knows we're coming, he might run." Edward didn't sleep that night. He sat in a chair by the door with a baseball bat across his lap and the lights off. The next morning, Marcus called again. This time, Edward answered. "Hey, Dad." Marcus's voice was smooth, warm. "I've been worried. You okay?" "I'm fine." "You sure?" "I drove by the old firehouse yesterday. Saw your truck there. That place is a death trap, Dad. I don't think you should be spending time there alone." Edward's grip tightened on the phone. "It's mine. I'll do what I want." Pause. "Of course. I care about you. I don't want you getting hurt. Is that why you broke into my apartment?" Silence. Then Marcus's voice changed. Colder. "I don't know what you're talking about. Someone went through my things. That neighborhood's rough, Dad. Maybe you should stay with me for a while. I've got plenty of space. We can talk. Work things out." "There's nothing to work out. Dad." Marcus's tone sharpened. "I know you're upset. I know you miss Mom. But you're not thinking clearly. People are starting to notice. Gene mentioned you came by his office last week, confused, asking about documents that don't exist. It's okay. We can get you help." Edward felt the trap closing. Marcus was setting the narrative. Confused old man. Grief-stricken. Unreliable. I'm not confused, Edward said quietly. Then what were you looking for at the firehouse? Edward hung up. His hands were shaking. He called Angela immediately. She moved the filing up. We go tomorrow, she said. Stay with your friend tonight. Don't go anywhere alone. Edward packed a bag and drove to Frank's house. Frank met him at the door, eyes hard. He threatened you? Not in words. But yeah. Then we end this. That night, Angela filed a motion in probate court to void Helen's will, submitted the tape, the documents, and a petition for an emergency hearing. She also filed a complaint with the state bar against Gene Pittman and alerted the district attorney's office to possible fraud. By morning it was done. The legal hammer had dropped. Marcus found out by noon. Edward's phone exploded with calls, texts, voicemails. He didn't answer any of them. Angela had advised total silence. But Marcus didn't stay silent. At 4 in the afternoon he showed up at the firehouse. Edward was there with Frank, securing the building, documenting everything for the court. They heard the car pull up, the door slam. Marcus walked in through the side door like he owned the place. He stopped when he saw Edward. His face was flushed, his eyes bright with anger. You filed a lawsuit against me? Edward straightened. His heart pounded, but he kept his voice level. I filed to restore what you stole. Marcus laughed, sharp and bitter. Stole? I saved the company. I saved you from yourself. Mom knew you couldn't handle it anymore. She told me. She told me the truth, Edward said. On tape. Marcus went still. What tape? The one where she explains how you lied to her. How you forged documents. How you and Gene manipulated her while she was dying. The color drained from Marcus's face. Then the rage came back hotter. That's bullshit. You're making this up. You're confused, Dad. Everyone knows it. The court will decide that, Frank said quietly from the doorway. Marcus turned on him. Stay out of this, old man. Can't do that, Frank said. I'm a witness. Marcus's hands curled into fists. He looked around the firehouse, his gaze landing on the locker room hall. She hid something here, didn't she? That's what this is about. That's why she bought this dump. He started toward the hallway. Edward stepped in front of him. Get out of my way, Marcus said. No. For a moment, Edward thought his son might hit him. He saw the calculation in Marcus's eyes, the weight of the situation, the consequences, the audience. Frank had his phone out, recording. Marcus stepped back. His face twisted into something ugly. You think you've won? You think some scratchy tape and fake documents are going to hold up in court? I got lawyers, Dad. Real ones. I've got medical records showing Mom's decline. I've got testimony from Gene, from the accountant, from everyone who matters. You've got nothing but paranoia and grief. I've got the truth, Edward said. Marcus shook his head slowly. The truth is you're a sad old man who can't let go. And when this is over, you'll have nothing. Not the company. Not this shithole. Nothing. He turned and walked out. The door slammed behind him. Edward's legs nearly gave out. Frank caught his arm. You did good. He's going to fight this with everything. Let him. We've got Helen's voice. We've got the documents. And now we've got him on camera threatening you. Frank held up his phone. Angela's going to love this. The hearing was set for 2 weeks later. In that time, Marcus's lawyers tried everything. Motions to dismiss, claims of dementia, demands for psychological evaluation, challenges to the tape's authenticity. Angela crushed every single one. She had the tape analyzed by a forensic audio expert who confirmed it was Helen's voice, unaltered. She had a handwriting expert verify Helen's notes. She had a retired judge review the documents and provide a statement calling the forgery obvious and egregious. The district attorney opened a criminal investigation into Marcus and Gene Pittman. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Edward sat in the front row and listened as Angela methodically dismantled Marcus's lies. She played the tape in open court. Helen's voice, fragile and clear, filled the room. Edward watched Marcus's lawyer flinch. When it was over, the judge took less than 10 minutes to decide. The evidence is clear and convincing, she said. The will submitted by Marcus Brennan is void. The original will is reinstated. All assets are to be returned to Edward Brennan immediately. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Marcus sat frozen in his seat. Gene Pittman looked like he might be sick. Edward felt 30 years lift off his shoulders. Outside the courthouse, Angela shook his hand. You did it. Helen did it, Edward said. You finished it. That counts. Within a month, the company was back in Edward's name. The house sale was reversed. Marcus was charged with fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. Gene Pittman was disbarred and charged as an accomplice. Both men took plea deals to avoid trial. Marcus got 18 months in prison and a felony record. Gene lost his license and his reputation. Edward sold the company. He didn't want it anymore. But he kept the Firehouse. With the money from the timber and mineral rights, worth nearly $400,000, just as Helen had said, Edward had the building restored. He turned it into a community center and museum honoring the town's firefighters, with a special wing dedicated to Chief Raymond Collar. Helen's father's coat hung in a glass case, and beside it, a plaque with his motto, "Check twice before you trust the ladder." Edward moved into a small apartment above the center. It was quiet, clean, and his. He spent his days organizing the archives, talking to visitors, and drinking coffee with Frank on the old concrete apron out front. On the first anniversary of Helen's death, Edward sat alone in the museum after hours. He played the tape one more time. Her voice, steady and strong even in her last days, filled the room. When it ended, he whispered, "I checked twice, love. Just like you taught me." He finally felt at peace. If this story reminded you that the truth always finds a way, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice and resilience. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and let me know in the comments what you would have done in Edward's place.